Hello, and welcome to Trail Chats. Today, we're trekking and chatting with Trevor Parham, CEO and founder of OakStop. Come along with us as we talk all things Oakland. Even this sling won't slow us down. So it's been really good. I'm really glad that you were finally able to get out here. I love the trails, you love the trails, and now we can love the trails together.
That's right.
Mr. Trevor Parham of OakStop, tell me a little bit about who you are. How does your Oakland story begin?
Okay. Born and raised in Oakland.
Okay.
So my Oakland story begins at Kaiser Medical Center, MacArthur Boulevard, back in the 80s, and grew up here as someone who really embraced all parts of the city, from the trails to the streets to the culture and the arts. And I feel that one of the things that I got from Oakland was this diversity, not just the diversity of landscapes, but people and ideas and just ways of being. So that was something that as I became an adult, I started to realize that I was lucky and fortunate to have all these different parts of Oakland as part of my own identity.
That sounds pretty cool. Have you ever left Oakland and lived anywhere else?
I did. I went away for school.
Okay.
And I went to Philadelphia, to University of Pennsylvania.
East Coast, okay.
East Coast, spent a lot of time in West Philly, spent a lot of time in New York.
Born and raised on the playgrounds where, okay.
I spent most of my days on the playground. And spent also time in New York and in Washington, D.C., where my mother's family's from. So spent a lot of time on the East Coast. And while I was out there, one of the things that became really clear was how special of a place Oakland was.
Tell me what made you understand and realize that being other places was great, but Oakland is home. What was pulling you back to Oakland?
Yeah, so some of the things that actually pulled me further into Philadelphia and further into New York was the hustle, right? When I got out there, people accepted me because I had a certain sense of hustle. And I distinctly remember this story when I was walking through South Philly one day, and I was very much Bay Area, right? I had locks, I was wearing a t-shirt, and then flip-flops.
I can see it.
And I'm walking through South Philly, and some guys started talking to me, and they said, "Why aren't you afraid out here?" And I said, "I'm from Oakland." And they said, "Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. All right, well, you're one of us." And so I took that same sort of spirit to New York, to Harlem and Brooklyn, where I first landed in New York, and it was the same type of thing. That kind of drive was something that was very much well received in New York. But then there were other things that I think were here in Oakland that weren't present there. Number one, when I first came back here after living out there, just for a visit, before I decided I was going to live here, I got off the plane, the air. So being out here on these trails, like taking in all this air, and every single time I came back home from the East Coast, this is where we came. As soon as we got home, I'd link up with my friends and was like, let's hit the trails. And I didn't have that same kind of outlet. Furthermore, things like the produce, but then also just realizing that we had so much influence culturally across all these other areas, across the country and across the world, that I really wanted to just pour into that in coming back here.
And that segues pretty well into your baby, what you have developed, your baby of the community. So tell me a little bit about OakStop. What is OakStop? It's no longer just a co-working space. It is a co-working company, organization. Tell me a little bit about OakStop.
Yeah, definitely. Building off my last point, right before I started OakStop, I almost took a position in South Africa for an entrepreneurship academy, Pan-African Entrepreneurship Academy, as their global communications director and entrepreneur and instructor.
Okay.
I had an offer letter. I visited, I toured. Everyone was really excited for me to be there. But then I realized, how could I go to Africa and teach entrepreneurship when there's so much need here at home? So that was a major turning point for me in terms of what I was going to do with my time. So in starting OakStop, the idea was, let's tap into Oakland's DNA. We have culture, but we also have this hustle and this entrepreneurship. And we also have a community of people that are being displaced from their home. And so we're picking apart that DNA. And we can't be Oakland if Oakland's people are no longer there at the forefront. So my goal was, we need to secure space and place for Oakland's community so we can continue to be who we are and so we can continue to grow that. So we started with a space for entrepreneurs and for co-working, but really the whole idea was much bigger. It was about letting the rest of the world understand that Oakland has been and will continue to be a leader nationally and globally.
And that was in 2014 that you started. Who was Trevor in 2014 in comparison to who Trevor is now in 2024? And is that same vision for OakStop still there? Has it matured? Tell me the difference between 2014 OakStop Trevor and 2024 OakStop Trevor.
2014 OakStop Trevor was a visionary who had already accomplished so much in a career by age 30 and was hungry to do more with that talent and potential, and also understood that the only way to fully bring that out was to do my own thing.
Okay.
And so at that time, what I wanted to do was I wanted to give. I wanted to give my time, talent, and treasure to our community to help us create something that, again, really represented us. And so we started with one building, but even at that time, when I first started in downtown Oakland, I understood some of the developments that were happening in Oakland in terms of real estate. And one of those main things was the BRT, the bus rapid transit line, that was going from downtown all the way out to East Oakland. And so my concept was not just one building in downtown, but that's the start. And we can have several different OakStop locations moving out along the transit lines.
Wow.
All the way into East Oakland to build up our entire community. And that was the vision I had when we started. So fast forward 10 years later, we went from one building all the way up to 6 buildings. And those 6 buildings, though, the difference was that we didn't spread them out over Oakland. We actually concentrated them all in
downtown Oakland, yeah.
As a campus. And so I think a lot of what I understood was the major impact that this model has and how we needed more than just one building. We needed to activate an entire neighborhood.
How did that switch for you? So you go from, because that's brilliant, the idea of being able to kind of drip, 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 drip all along the way, and you are permeating Oakland from west to east, right? How do you then change that and swivel to do a campus, an area around Broadway? And what have you seen as the outcome?
So one of the reasons that we pivoted from this idea of going from downtown all the way out to East Oakland, the pivot actually was the pandemic.
Okay.
And we saw everyone pivoting during the pandemic. The point being is that in February of 2020, we had 3 different LOIs signed for properties in West Oakland, in North Oakland, and East Oakland. And so in some of those were partnerships with BART. We had an LOI with some of BART's properties. Again, we wanted to expand across transit lines. So we were very much following that same strategy, but in February of 2020, all bets were off. So both parties said, okay, we have to step away from this. And in that time, I think then we had to focus inward and figure out who are we and what are we going to be. And given that our capacity during the pandemic was definitely minimized, the idea of then expanding so far away was just more than we could, digest at that time.
Right.
And so, interestingly enough, because we had already created so many strong relationships in downtown, many of those relationships were tied to properties that went vacant. So during the pandemic, we had multiple properties and property owners approach us to say, we know you all are so active in this community downtown, and we have these vacant buildings that were previously operated in very similar ways. For instance, the California Ballroom was an event venue, and they knew that we could operate that. So we were approached by the California Ballroom saying, can you all take this over because you're so invested in this community? So what we started to see was downtown was suffering because our commercial corridor was devoid of all the small businesses, that there was now an entire paradigm shift in terms of space and real estate that required something like a shared flexible space model. And so then we said, it's easier for us to manage our resources within a walkable footprint.
Right.
And downtown needs us now.
and you deepened relationships. So the idea of community working, community coming to your space to work, now you're working with the folks on the other side, the ones that own the buildings, the ones that are running the programming. That's a lot. That's huge. That's really impactful. It sounds like it was a lot of work, big uplifts. Can we walk a little bit and chat some more about what it took to get there?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's head that way, and then maybe we can do a little bit of a loop.
Okay.
All right.
Perfect.
Let's go. We were chatting about your expansion. We were talking about the heavy lifts. You said that these woods are part of your world. Tell me what you do to focus on your mental and emotional health as you are running this company and leading here in Oakland. What do you do to focus on you emotionally and mentally?
Yeah. So what I've done to help me run OakStop is run these trails, quite literally. Let's see, about over 10 years ago, a really close friend of mine and I, we decided and committed ourselves to running the trails in the Oakland Hills every Sunday morning. And we would push ourselves to really focus on distance running and endurance running and getting up to sometimes 8 to 10 miles in on a Sunday morning, very much focused on the uphill. And I think a big part of that was you're pushing yourself through something that feels insurmountable. And in doing so, you start to practice what it means to attune your body to the insurmountable and focus on your breathing, focus on your posture, on your movement, and on your rhythm, and also getting that mantra in your mind that's keeping it all together to say, I can do this, I'm gonna make it happen, I think I can, whatever it is. And that's a certain spirituality, to be able to wield the powers of your body and your mind to accomplish something that neither think is initially possible. And so through that exercise over years and years and years, not only did I sort of do that for my mental and physical health, but coincidentally, this good friend of mine was a former colleague, was a finance professional. So we would talk about business. And we would talk about it though from a creative space.
Right.
And we found that it was able to sort of open up our minds, especially a finance professional.
Yep.
I've always been a creative professional, but that's part of what our bond is I offer that creativity. And it helped us really think outside of the box when we had this air, we had these endorphins, but then also we just had all these sounds and the quiet at the same time.
So you have achieved a great deal. Talk to me about the expansion achievement. I understand that it was, I think I've got the order correct, so the Broadway building, and then you actually purchased that building, and then the California Ballroom, and four others. So give us that order and how things are and where you are. Where can we find OakStop?
Sure. So we started with our original location in 2014 at 17th and Broadway, and that's the building that we now own.
Woohoo! I came to that opening. It was a really big deal. Don't just pass that over. It's a very big deal to go from leasing a building, leasing a space, to owning said space.
Yeah.
We talk about that for millennials, the generation millennials, lower Gen X, how buying and owning property is so far out of reach. My brother, you own a building. It's not just a house. You own a building where you are employing folks. So don't just sweep over that. You bought the building, and how did that come to be?
It came about because over the years, we had known that ownership was destiny. From the first month that I started OakStop, I met a good friend and a supporter who's still very much a supporter of OakStop, who's very active in the world of social impact funding. And he invited me up to Vancouver to meet a number of his other colleagues in the social venture network. And as I was meeting some of these people at this mixer, he was introducing me and saying, Trevor's doing this great project in Oakland involving real estate. And the main question multiple people asked me, and they said, well, do you own the building? Now, let's see, we were about 3 months in to the business at this point, and this was an entirely bootstrapped operation. So I have these people who are millionaires asking me, well, do you own the building? like with a straight face.
Right? No, they just assumed it was
Right?
one of the 4 that you
Right?
have in your back pocket.
And I explained, no, we don't own the building. And I noticed that immediately they shifted their focus. It was no longer of interest to them without us owning the building, despite, how much I thought it was an accomplishment just to have a space.
Yeah.
So for me, it was all about, this is something that we need to do to validate this approach for our community. Yeah. People won't listen to us if we don't own the building, no matter what we're doing. So from that point, it was like, how do I figure this out? So part of the strategy for us getting to owning the building was increased community engagement. What increased community engagement brought us was more activation in the building. Okay. And more activation created more justification for more occupation. So what I'm saying there is, as we had more and more activation, more activities, more people in our space, then from a business side, it justified us expanding into other open suites within that building, financially. From there, that justification meant that now we need even more occupation of this building.
Right.
We got to a point where we had incrementally expanded. We started in that building with only 4,000 square feet of space in one suite. That's a 25,000 square foot building. Wow. So what we did was, inch by inch, we expanded. Whenever somebody else moved out, we would go to ownership and say, we've got more justification for greater occupation. Can we move into the space? So we continued to move into those different spaces. And over time, it became not just the dominant tenant, but then again, talk about pivots, when the pandemic hit, we were essentially the only tenant.
Wow.
So it created a scenario from a finance and real estate perspective where the owners started to realize, you're occupying so much of this building, this multi-tenant building, as a single tenant, that if for any reason you were to leave, as many tenants are leaving nowadays, then I'll be out of a business as a real estate owner. So they actually came to us and they said, and this was actually, I think, before the pandemic in 2019. They said, we want to see if you're interested in buying the building. Wow. And I said yes. And it took from 2019 to 2023 to actually get the deal done through multiple iterations and multiple deal structures. Right. But the point is that we had created so much leverage that it was in the best interest of ownership to sell it to us. And then at the same time, that leverage allowed others to see that it would make sense for us to have the whole building, because we essentially already did.
Okay, so then quickly go through the others. Again, the California room came on board, and then?
Yeah, so to rewind, before the pandemic, we had 3 locations. Our second location was at 14th and Harrison, and we took on that location in 2018.
Okay.
Our third location was at Richmond Bart, and we took on that location in 2019.
Wow.
All of these expansions were all invites.
Because again, folks were saying, I'm digging the Broadway site. I need space elsewhere because of proximity or because there are more folks. I don't want to be over. What was the impetus for wanting to move?
What we were finding was that we were attracting more and more people from all aspects of the community. And one of the particular drivers was Kaiser Permanente. They wanted to rent from us and were renting from us at 1721 Broadway, but they always had these large kind of banquet format corporate offsite needs, and we couldn't quite achieve that. And as early as 2016, I started trying to figure out, how do I tell Kaiser yes? How do I make this work more consistently? And so I realized, what if I had another space that was simply geared towards these offsites for nonprofits?
Sense.
So that was our second space, and we really dedicated it all to like offsites. There was no co-working there. But what we found was that there's so many people that want the space, we need more space. So that was site number 2, but it came from an invite. That
speaks volumes to me, because that shows, again, that you are showing the need in the community. You are making yourself needed, and not you, but what you are offering. It's needed here in the community. Can we walk and chat some more? Because I have so many more questions about this, and just really what the future is, where you're headed, and what this could look like as a model here in Oakland for strengthening our community.
Yeah.
Can we walk and chat some more?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's see who else we hear, because these birds are pretty loud. Yeah. Let's see who we can hear chatting. chatting about the lift. We've been chatting about expansion. Tell me a little bit in more tangible ways. Who is showing up at OakStop? Who is there?
Yeah. So the people that are showing up at OakStop are generally people who really want to invest back into this community with their presence.
Tell me more.
So first off, we started focusing on Black artists and entrepreneurs because those people were being displaced. And so those folks were the first who really said, okay, great, this is a place where we want to invest our presence here. And some of those people were very popular and sort of favored musicians and artists in our community. So some of the first people there were watercolor painter James Gales, musicians like Jennifer Johns and Kev Choice. Those were people who, from the first week, said, this is a place where we need to be. And so with that investment comes then a validation where people start to say, okay, this is a place that has real meaning to this community. And those were my friends, right? Those weren't people that I recruited as part of a strategy. It's like Jen Johns, we grew up together. So anything I've done ever, she's gotten the first call, right? So from
really
there,
is homegrown.
Yeah, it really is homegrown.
Yeah.
It's really authentic, right? And one of the principles that I always had was that people are valuable. So when we're trying to understand where the value is, let's focus on the people that are there. So with that, we started to then attract other folks who felt very passionate about Oakland because they saw that there was this group of passionate artists of color that were all gathered there. So then you've got other nonprofit organizations, you've got other independent consultants, then you have some people that are doing the tech startup thing, but then you also have other larger businesses in Oakland. All these people are sometimes using the space for shared workspace, but then we also have groups that are using the space for event space and meeting space. And that's a huge circle of folks. So, really large organizations like Google and Meta, Tesla, Clorox, JP Morgan, Kaiser, they're all using OakStop.
You know what I like about that? That means that those big names, those big companies are coming to Oakland for their conversations.
Exactly. And so one of the other key principles that I understood very early on was that we couldn't get caught in this divide of we're the, folks who are born and raised in Oakland, and then there's these newcomers that are gentrifying, and we want to keep them out, and we want to keep our space. That didn't work for me. And in many ways, it was because my own lived experience had integrated with all these other different groups and audiences. So I couldn't then say these people who I've spent so much of my time with are now not allowed
invalid,
in this community. So I was always figured out, how do we be a bridge? Figuratively in many ways, literally, right? Because we're talking about San Francisco and Silicon Valley being these incoming forces into Oakland. And so for me, it was all about developing and cultivating local community leadership and then translating that into ambassadorship. So as people want to come into Oakland and they're doing things like remote work, creating startups, having convenings and large events, they're having to interface with the local community. And those local community members are the ambassadors that tell people, this is what Oakland means, and this is how you can support our community, and this is essentially how you fit in. And for me, that's a much more empowered stance to take, to say, yeah, come on in, but we're running the show, versus keeping people out because you think that they'll run you over.
These are heavy lifts. You are not only talking about jobs and opportunities, you're talking about people's lives and influence. What's next for OakStop? What's next for Trevor?
The plans now are to inspire others on a broader scale. So we want to take what we've done in Oakland, and we want this model to be reflected in other cities around the country and ideally around the world, where any neighborhood where you have communities of color that have culture, that have business aspiration, but also have challenges, those communities can take a model like this as a way to uplift themselves, showcase themselves, and give themselves a platform. The whole concept is a platform. And by controlling real estate and space, you have a physical, literal platform, especially at a time now where our real estate market is at an all-time low. And it's created an opportunity where those who have not had the same level of resources actually now can kind of start to procure some of those assets for themselves and build those platforms which then will start to drive and lead and define the next paradigm.
You've got a plan.
I've got a plan.
You've
I've
got
got
a
a plan.
vision.
And a lot of it was inspired by another global Oakland legacy that was built by the Black Panther Party. They figured out how to take the needs of a community and build that into a movement and a platform that then had various programs that benefited the community
And built upon one another.
and spread to city to city to city. And then that legacy even spread beyond the US to communities all around the world, because people saw this is how people who are oppressed take up for themselves, build their own platforms with an economic foundation, and then spread that to other cities as a way to not only empower themselves, but a way to protect themselves against oppressive forces, particularly those that are capitalistically driven. So when we learn how to control our own economics through cooperative economics, then we can accomplish anything.
I have learned so much, and it's been a really good time chatting with you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your leadership here in Oakland. I appreciate it, and the community appreciates it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to do it.
You know that I still have questions, right?
Of course, we still got time to walk.
All right, let's walk. We can make our way back around and loop one more time, and we can chat some more.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay.